Hello, I'm Doug Gamble, the missions pastor at Crossroads Fellowship, and I have with me today two of my dear friends and colleagues, and they have an interesting story about leadership transition. And in my 38 years of ministry, I've watched a lot of them. This will be my third one here at Crossroads Fellowship. And I have to say, most of the transitions I've watched have been somewhat, there's been sad things, they've been disruptive, sometimes they've been downright horrible. And I think many of us know that as lay folks, as ministers, as leaders. And so when a good story happens, I think it's really important to get the story behind that. And so I've asked my brothers if they would just take some time and kind of tell the personal journey that is behind this really neat, smooth, positive, energizing transition that we're experiencing right now at Crossroads. So let me introduce them to you. This is Chuck Millian. He's the senior pastor at Crossroads, was a founding member and has been senior pastor since back in 2000. We go back 24 years. He was on the phone call that said, hey, come be our small group guy. So we go back a long way. And then my other colleague is Andy George, and Andy is the associate senior pastor, soon to become our senior pastor, the fourth one at Crossroads. He came as a student pastor, did a wonderful job with that, and as we went to be in a multi-site church, he started our first multi-site and was the campus pastor, and then became the associate senior pastor and is now heir apparent in a few months to take over. So I have a couple questions for you guys, and I'd like to start with you, Chuck. I work with a lot of pastors, a lot of guys your age, and man, they're all geared up. They've worked hard like you. I remember we were about 1,000, 1,200 people when you took the baton. And now we're about 8,000 people. We got 10 services and 2 locations. I mean, we're a lot different than 16 years ago. Most people would be saying, I'm going to ride this horse till it won't ride anymore, and you're getting off? What? I mean, there's a story there, and I'm not sure our people would quite understand it. What's going on here?
Well, it's multiple things. Probably about 5-6 years ago, I got the sense from the Lord that I needed to start putting a succession plan in place. And so, I'm a planner, as everybody knows, and so I sat down, went away for a long-range praying plan. I do this every quarter, and that was sort of the focus. And I kind of laid out a 10-year plan, and in that process, we had to identify the right person and go through the process of prayer and interviews and to see if there's the right person to tap on the shoulder to begin the journey of the succession process, which I viewed as a 10-year process based on where I was.
So you actually had a long-range process in mind from the jump, because that's not always been the case.
Yeah, I am human, and sometimes it takes God a little time to get my full attention. He got my attention quickly, and I began moving in that direction. But even after several days of prayer and planning and listening, I only got the bigger piece of it. I didn't get more of the details until we started moving. But I had a 10-year plan, and I felt like Andy was clearly the guy. And I'll talk about why later, I guess. But it just seemed to me he was. So I went to the elders, and I sat down with them. I gave them this big plan and proposal, and I said, guys, I feel like we need a succession plan. Something could happen to me. I know in 10 to 15 years, I need to be transitioning. Someone else needs to take the lead, not so much because I don't have any energy anymore. I certainly can't afford to retire. I got other things to do in the future, but the church needs a new leader. I mean, you just need new fresh blood, and I didn't want to lose momentum. And so I felt like the Lord had made that clear. And so we went through the process with the elders of prayer and discussion, and then eventually we tapped Andy and his wife Stacy to come in and walk through the process, and they took the risk of that, knowing that we could go through the whole process and end up, the Lord says no, and I needed to trust that he could go through that and not be so hurt if it was no that he would storm off. I knew he had integrity and he would trust God in it, but it was risky on his part, but I knew he could go through the process, and so we did. And over time, it became clear to the elders he was going to be the guy. And not long after that, probably a little less than a year, the Lord kind of intervened in my prayer and plan time again, and made it clear that the time frame was quicker than I thought. Actually, it was last fall that he told me it needed to be the end of this year. So probably a 15, 16-month window that it was time to move, which was kind of a surprise to me, but exciting. But but because we had a plan, we were able to sit down and say, okay, we're just moving up the timelines.
Chuck, you said a couple things there that you kind of slipped by, but I can see how significant they are. You said, I think 3 times there, the Lord spoke to me.
Yeah.
Now, all of us want to hear from the Lord and so forth, but I know you've actually done some training in some of our training materials on how people can listen to the Lord, and I'm aware that you have a habit of trying to do that. Could you talk a little bit about maybe your ongoing way of doing that, but especially, this is a big deal. It's not every day that the Lord says, hey, it's time to pass the baton to this organization you've given your life to.
I began the day I became senior pastor. One of my conditions, so to speak, with the elder board was that I believe, A, I'm an introvert. I'm not your typical senior pastor in that regard. B, I just believe that I need time to hear. And so every quarter, there's what I call a fifth week. And I box that week in advance every year, and I go away. And I pray, I read, I listen, I jot down. And it takes a while, at least a day, just to get all the noise out of my head, of all of the responsibilities, all the other voices, all the to-do lists. And then once I get that sort of sorted, then I can start really listening and letting things stir. And in that time, the Lord tends to give guidance. Over the years, these new ideas for new projects, new directions, new ministry opportunities, foundation, all the things we've done over the years.
Our chaplaincy ministry, a number of really significant things as part of the architecture now.
Absolutely. And so, therefore, I've become used to that process of letting God have my undivided attention. And so he tends to use those times in pretty significant ways. And it was in one of those times where, he set the idea of it's time to put a succession plan in place. And then once we were moving into the plan, we were halfway through, 5 years into it, when last fall on a praying plan, he made it really clear the time is now, not 5 years from now.
Well, I know you're a planner. You've got the plan. You got to be thinking, oh my goodness, I got a staff of 60 and an elder board of this and a congregation of 8,000. I got to tell them, because I think we'd already told people we're moving in this direction, and now we're flipping the time frame. That's not so easy to just switch gears like that in a big organization like ours.
Yeah, it was a little overwhelming at first. Obviously, I spent a few more days praying about it. Wanted to make sure I heard clearly. But my wife and I were in sync on it. She actually was feeling the same way, which was a big deal to me, because she was always very supportive. And when she began to say, maybe it is time, I realized I really needed to stop and consider what the Lord was saying, and not just dismiss it as, I'm just tired or whatever, because I really wasn't. I had plenty of ideas. But as the clarity came, I realized, I went into, God sort of began pouring out the steps of action to actually make this transition happen by the end of the year.
I know a lot of young guys after that, I'm doing youth pastor, then I'm moving on. And you clearly didn't. You clearly could have. Why did you hang around here? And even before we get to the senior president, why didn't you leave, 5, 6 years ago, when you could have probably gone and founded a church and started your own, or taken another church as a senior pastor?
Yeah, I think there's a couple answers to that question, Doug. I think one big thing is my wife and I and my family believe in this church. I think that's huge, that we believe in Chuck and our elders and our staff, and the vision of the church, to transform the triangle of the world is great and awesome, and building disciples, and I think that's part of it. When we really believe in this church, we believe what this church is called to.
This isn't a job for you, it doesn't sound like.
No, and it's not. And I think that there's a transition in my heart that happened while I was still doing youth ministry here, right before we did multi-site. And a lot of people in ministry, myself included, sometimes it does feel like a job. It is a job to some degree. And this is a church where I'm ministering at. And so even though it's a church I'm ministering at, you pour everything into it, but there's not that this is my home church connection. And I think for my wife and I, my family, a couple years after being here, it was literally in a day's time where all of a sudden it was like, this is our church. This is not just where I work. It's not just where I do ministry. This is our home church. We call this place home. My kids are in school here. We're settled here. It's not a convenience thing. It's not, I guess I'm here, I might as well stay. It really is something internally that shifts it from being a place where I do ministry to my home church. And I think that was a huge thing for us, to make that switch in our mind that we don't want to go anywhere. And as long as they'd have us stay here and do what we do, then this is where we're going to be, for the unforeseeable future, and just go for it and see what happens.
And you're no rookie to ministry. You've been at it a long time too. How long have you been in ministry now?
So full-time, 21 years. Most youth pastors, if you get asked the question, hey, what do you want to do? A lot of people ask youth pastors, what do you want to do when you become a real pastor? Or what do you want to do after youth ministry? And we had been here 5 full years doing youth ministry here, 10, 11 years prior to that, full-time youth ministry in 2 other churches. And for me internally, a lot of, if any youth pastors are watching this, you'll really understand this. As I was here, each grade, starting with 9th grade, started to bug me more and more. And so after a year being here, ninth graders were getting on my nerves. I'm like, oh my goodness, I love sophomore, juniors, and seniors. And the next year I was like, I really don't want to do anything with freshmen and sophomore. And then it was juniors, and then it was seniors. And then by that point I'm going, all right, maybe I need to do something different. But, for a couple of years, multi-site terminology started becoming more and more popular to some degree. And I like entrepreneur
You were here
things.
when we were doing the multi-venue. We were sort of figuring things
Yes.
out here. We kind of knew the next step was out of the building.
Yeah, we were already doing multi-venues within our own church, and it had been floated and alluded to that one day down the road a multi-site would be a possibility. And so I'm kind of entrepreneurial in nature. I'm more extroverted than Pastor Chuck, and so that stuff excites me. And so when Chuck and I talked about multi-site, I talked to Stacy about it first, of course, and I was already kind of excited about it. And surprisingly, she was like, man, I love youth ministry, and we've been doing it for so long, and really this is what we need to do. And so we spent time praying over just multi-siting. And
So
then
the ninth graders weren't bugging her like they were you.
no, I guess not. But man, you can only do so many smelly retreats before it's time to move on from youth ministry. And so after a short time, we both came to agreement that this is what God's calling us to do. And then after praying about the location, it was a perfect location for us to launch our first campus, and it hit right where we were already living and doing life outside of church and involvement in sports and school and all that things. And so it just made sense to us. It felt right for us, and so we launched it.